Welcome back, everyone. This is week 16, and this week we are steaming ahead and looking at abstract expressionism as well as conceptualism. So, we have come a long way in this class. We started with the Renaissance, we looked at Mannerism, Baroque, Rococo, Neoclassical, Romanticism, Realism, Impressionism, Post Impressionism, the Fauves, Cubism and early abstraction, Surrealism, and now there are a lot of, as we move into the 1950s, we're going to see a lot of different types of movements all happening at the same time, and it would really take us an entire semester to cover all of them. So I am going to pick a couple to showcase in these next 2 weeks. And so abstract expressionism is absolutely fundamental. It's going to be a very important American art style, and it's going to set us up for the art styles that follow, things such as pop art and op art. And if you notice here in the 1970s, all right, we usually choose 1965 to 1970s as the end of modernism. I know this is a very strange concept because we think that modern art is like if you go to SF MoMA and you look at art that's being made now, that's modern art. And we, even art historians, use that term sometimes, but it's technically incorrect because modernism starts at the end of the 19th century with Impressionism and it ends in 1965, 1970. And then after that, we have postmodernism because art historians are nothing if not creative in naming styles. I always kind of wonder what's going to happen after postmodernism. Another name for this time period is contemporary art, and you'll hear me say that quite a bit. And so for contemporary art, postmodernism, I'm going to be bringing in next week. We're going to look at outsider art, graffiti, all of that sort of stuff. And then this week, we are looking at conceptual art, which is a huge art movement that is still going strong today. So let's jump right in to abstract expressionism. Went far. All right. So the world after World War II. Europe lay in ruins. Millions were dead. This was one of the most costly wars, both economically, in terms of cultural value and cultural heritage, the destruction of a lot of architecture and art, and of course, in lives. At this point, it felt like we were on the brink of possibly the end of the world. And I keep saying that throughout my classes. It seems every several years there are these catastrophic events that make us feel like we're at the brink. Like if you press a button at any moment, it could be the end of the world. And quite literally after World War II, with the development of nuclear warfare. And I mentioned last week that we're going to have a flock of European artists coming to the United States and mostly settling in New York. And thus, we have the art capital of the world for the first time settled in the United States. So it had been in Italy, it moved to France, and now it is in New York. We have a new art world. Right? And by art world, I mean the people that make art, the people that sell art, museums, art historians, all of these people collectors, they make up the art world. And they're all going to be have their capital in New York City. So it's a place to be. It doesn't mean that there's no artists, say in Mexico, or like I'm just going to show you in a second, or in Europe, or in Australia, or in Africa. It just means that if you want to be the big name, you usually come to New York. We're going to see that Frida Kahlo comes to New York to have a show. It's kind of the place to be. Just like Paris is the place to be if you wanted to be in fashion, say 100 years before. All right, and we're going to see exhibits of the world's best artists in New York City. This is a piece. Here, for example, we have Siqueiros was a very famous muralist from Mexico, and he came and he showcased his art in New York City, and we're going to see how his work is going to influence the abstract expressionists. So let's talk broad strokes. What is abstract expressionism? So it spans from around 1943 to 1965. Notice that 1965, that's why we usually use it as a cutoff for the end of modernism. And after, everything gets really ironic with pop art. So we consider that postmodern. All right. So it is, like I said before, a very specifically American art movement. So this is not a movement that was adopted by US artists, but one that was developed by US artists. Of course, there had been original American art movements before, but these were pre Columbian, so prior to colonization. What we're going to see is a lot of human emotion expressed, you guessed it, abstractly. Right? So again, expressionism, remember expressionism is all about the expression of emotions by the artist, not by the social community, but by the actual artist. What is the artist feeling? Not necessarily the patron, so the person that paid for the art. There's going to be a lot of anxiety and trauma. You saw that video on kind of the anxieties of the modern age, as well with people recovering from the horrors of the Second World War. It's influenced by the surrealists and this idea of tapping into this darker space, this subconscious in your mind. They're also going to be influenced by the Fauves and, as I mentioned, the post impressionism and the expressionists in how they use color. You're going to see a really interesting use of color. There is kind of a stereotypical abstract expressionist, and this was very much a time period where they embraced the idea of the rugged individual, again, a very American ideal. And the artist became almost this kind of macho man. He smoked, he went to bars, he drank a little too much, he was a womanizer. There was a stereotype to the abstract expressionist. And this stereotype was both harmful because there were female abstract expressionists. This is a piece by Helen Frankenthaler. Unfortunately, they did not get as much attention during their lifetime, at least the early part of the abstract expressionist movement, as the men. But they were there and they played a huge role in developing abstract expressionism. And along with that, artists that were part of the LGBTQ community, right? We have some big names in abstract expressionism that hid their homosexuality for a large part of their lives because, again, this fear of being prosecuted. Of course, this is going to set up the stage for pop art and personalities like Andy Warhol, right, who embrace kind of the kitsch and the over the top persona that did not hide his homosexuality. It was part of his brand. So the world really changes in terms of the art world and what is acceptable in the art world, both during the abstract expressionist movement and afterwards. And lastly, painterly. And what this means is the abstract expressionist did not want to create an illusion. They wanted their paintings, their sculptures, but especially their paintings, to look like paintings. They wanted the brush strokes. They wanted the paint drips. They wanted that action. You saw that piece on the video on performance art. Well, this is kind of a performance that they're doing in painting. So they see it as a very physical activity and they want that portrayed in their work. So let's talk about the most famous abstract expressionist, and that is Jackson Pollock. So he was a leader in this movement. He was influenced by several different groups and art styles, which I found fascinating because when you look at his later work, you're like, he was influenced by kindergartners. No, I'm kidding. So he was influenced by Benton, and Benton was uh, uh, an American artist. He had already started abstracting figures, right? By Cicados, who I showed you in the previous slide. And Cicados, again, was a Mexican muralist. He was really cutting edge. He was doing experiments with spray paint all the way back when it was invented. He kind of really abstracted and used a lot of motifs and styles that modern graffiti artists use today. So, again, really cutting edge artist. And interestingly enough, by Navajo tradition, iconography, and art. And you can see that in this piece. This is actually an early piece by Jackson Pollock. And you can see many of these artists start as figurative painters and then slowly become more and more abstract. But he is best known for his drip paintings. And now that I show you this, you know exactly who I am talking about. And these paintings are huge. I'm probably going to have you watch a video on Jackson Pollock. He paints on the floor, meaning the canvas is usually on the floor. He grabs a canister of paint, a paintbrush, and then he just stands over the canvas and drips paint onto it. Inevitably, I always have a student that says, I'm going to do my exercise 4, so my art piece, as a drip painting, and they all end up saying it is so much harder than it seems. And these type of paintings really are one of those things that it seems really easy. Like I said, it looks like he was inspired by a 5-year-old, but they're actually incredibly complex, because in order to drip paint almost as evenly as he does, with the spontaneity of just kind of dripping it onto the canvas, is actually incredibly difficult. When you look at the layers of paint and the way that they weave one into the other, it is actually quite masterful. And I know I'm not going to convince all of you, and I will be the first to admit that I am not the biggest fan of modern and contemporary art. But the more time I spend teaching about Pollock and talking about the work of the abstract expressionist, the better I understand it and the more that I appreciate it. So for those of you that love it, great, you have found your art style that you're like, I like that stuff. For those of you that still can't wrap your head around it, it's okay. You don't have to love everything, especially wait till we get to conceptualism. Uh, but with time, I'm hoping that you come to appreciate the work that Pollock did. Here's another with color. And as you can see, they are actually quite complex pieces. Now, the next artist is actually my favorite abstract expressionist, and that is Mark Rothko. So while Jackson Pollock, you can remember him as the drip painting guy, Mark Rothko is the blocks of color. Okay? So again, here is Rothko turning to a sort of mysticism and trying to find spirituality through the use of color. Right? So again, is very similar than artists before him, and everybody says something along the lines of like, you everything that's ever been invented has already been invented, so you're not doing anything new and innovative. And in some ways they're not, in that they're still thinking and exploring the same elements and principles that artists for millennia have explored. However, that personal expression and the way in which they do it is new and unique. And we can say that about Mark Rothko. So here we have pure color abstraction. And what that means is he's using pure color and it's abstracted. So what is this? Right? These pieces have been interpreted and can be interpreted in so many ways. And that's one of the things that we talked about when we mentioned abstraction, that it can be interpreted in any way by anybody in the world. You can show this to somebody in sub-Saharan Africa. You can show this to somebody in Canada. You can show this to a and Aborigines living in Australia, and they are all going to have a different interpretation, but they're all going to connect it with it in a particular way. Why? Because color is one of the primal things that we engage with, right? So, what does this piece make you feel? That is what Rothko wanted to get at. He wanted to evoke your emotion just by looking at the piece. And what's really interesting is the way that he asked for his pieces to be displayed. So here we have artists thinking about how their art should be displayed in a modern museum. So no longer in a cathedral or in a palace, but in an actual museum with the white walls and everything. So Mark Rothko wanted his work, his pieces are pretty big as well, to be on one wall by itself in an empty room with a bench so that somebody could sit in front of it and just contemplate it and just feel. He wanted you to feel. What does this piece make you feel? Now, the SF MoMA does have a piece, and it is kind of displayed in this way, in which when you sit on the bench, it's the only thing you see. However, whenever I go there, I notice that people have a really hard time just looking at the piece. Why? Because we're distracted by our phones, we're distracted by the people around us, and it is incredibly uncomfortable to just sit there with your feelings about this particular painting. But I challenge you to do that. I challenge you to just take a Rothko or take any piece of art and just sit with it for a quiet minute and see what it makes you feel. This is what Rothko wanted his work to be all about. Oh, yeah. And there's our last bullet points. He's known for these color block paintings. And the video I'm going to have you watch of Rothko looks at the Rothko Chapel. So here's where you're going to be like, this lady's crazy. What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you look at the explanation of the Rothko Chapel. This is a chapel for post-World War II modern, anxiety-ridden, technology-driven society. So this is a chapel where you walk in. It's here in the United States. I always forget what state, but it's here in the United States. You walk in, and all around you are these black canvases, and you can tell that they're kind of different shades of black, but they're all black canvases, and they're set up as triptychs. And if you remember that from when we looked at religious paintings at the beginning, they have a religious connotation, and he in fact calls it a chapel, even though it's nobody practices faith in here. This is a chapel to something else, and I want you to compare it after you watch the video, because he does a really great job of analyzing this chapel in particular. Compare it to the beginning of the semester when we looked at the Sistine Chapel. How do they both reflect the cultures in which they were created, the anxieties that people felt during these times? Because I mean, we're feeling basically the same anxieties that people in the 15th century, 16th century were feeling, right? It's just a different things that cause it. Although, we're still worried about disease, we're still worried about job security, we're still worried about peace and how we are going to survive, right? Those are all sort of things that we all worry about, but the manifestations of them are slightly different. So watch the video and kind of think about this question. And next, we are going to switch over to conceptual art. And we've had some really heavy weeks in terms of the art that we look at. I mean, the art of the 20th and 21st century is almost always dark, with the exception of maybe Salvador Dali. Sometimes he gets quite playful. So let's look at conceptual art and kind of lighten things up a little. I don't know if any of you watched this, were aware of this, but there was a banana put on display. I believe it was last semester. It was by Mauricio Catalan, and it was named The Comedian, 2019. So there you go. That's the date. So what happens is he walks into the gallery. He's like, I have a piece. And this guy is known for kind of these outrageous conceptual works. He is the one that made the whole toilet made completely out of gold. Yeah, he's this guy. So he says, I have this piece. He takes a banana and he duct tapes it to the wall, and that's his piece. Interestingly enough, the gallery sells it for $125,000 because that's the price the artist wanted for it. And somebody bought it. And then they went to an art fair. And an art fair is kind of, if you've ever been to a book fair or like something like Comic-Con, this is where all the like art nerds come and they look at all the modern and contemporary art that's on sale. And if you have money, you can buy it. It's all there. It's all together. They're usually international events. And I'm sure we won't be having any of those for a while. But anyway, back to this piece. So they're at a large art fair. I believe it was Art Basel in Florida. But this piece, and I might be wrong on that, he puts up this piece, and immediately somebody is like, why is there a banana duct taped to the wall? And so they take a photograph, they put it on Instagram, and it goes viral. Everybody's talking about this banana. Everybody wants to be photographed with the banana. So there's long lines of people trying to get a selfie with the banana. And it sells again for another $125,000. So just keep track of how much money he's made off of this banana. By the way, he can keep selling it because all he has to do is replace the banana. And so then we are at the point where people are getting their photographs taken with this new banana, and a guy comes up to it. He takes the duct tape off the banana, and he eats the banana. And as he's eating the banana, which is worth $125,000, I will just say that, he says, I am a performance artist. Now you know what a performance artist is. And this is my piece called Hungry Artist. And again, there is another uproar about this banana. People filmed it. There were questions about whether he was going to get arrested for this. It was just this gigantic prank that was also a piece of performance art. It was insane. And the banana sells again for $150,000 now. But in case you're like, but he ate the banana, again, you can just replace the banana. That's not the point, right? So who was buying this? Because you're thinking like there's some really stupid rich people out there. Well, actually, it was museums who wanted this piece in their collection. And before you go to your call center, like I'm gonna find some inanimate object or food object and tape it with duct tape to the wall, and I'll be famous now. What makes this piece so valuable? Right? This piece is valuable because the artist put it at this outrageous price. And the gallery put it next to other types of art that were equally as expensive. And it's not about the banana. It's not about the technique, right? If I just showed you the the Sistine Chapel is all about Michelangelo's amazing artistry and his technical ability. No more. Technical ability out the window with conceptual art. There are still amazing artists that are working figuratively, right? So that hasn't gone out the window. But if you're a conceptual artist, you think more about the concept, so the idea behind the piece, than the actual technical execution of the piece. So it's not about the art object, it's about the idea. So think about what the banana stands for. And this is the guy that ate the banana, by the way, as he's eating it. But this is a quote by the artist himself. He said, bananas are a symbol of global trade, a double entendre, as well as a classic device for humor. So he's explaining what the banana is all about. He's also just kind of messing with us, which a lot of conceptual artists love to do. The other example I'm going to have you watch is Banksy. So Banksy is a street artist. He's what we would call our outsider artist. And he created this piece. He often goes against the idea of the art establishment. So most artists today hate the art establishment because they have very little power in it. It is elitist and often marginalizes communities of color and everybody that is basically not privileged. So what he does is most of his work is done on public property. There are people that rush to these places, including San Francisco, to cut off the piece of the wall so that they can sell it. And so he's making fun of the art establishment in this piece, and that this is a copy of one of his most famous works, A Girl with a Red Balloon. And what he does is he puts it in this gold frame, which there is a significance behind that. And he has it shred itself as the auction is going and as it sells. And it only becomes more valuable when it's a shredded piece of artwork. Again, so it's the concept of it self destructing, not so much the fact that it is a piece by Banksy. Right? So the concept again. And this is one of the most famous conceptual pieces. Not this particular chair, the concept behind this piece. And usually I do this in class, and I have a physical chair. So if there's a physical chair in your house around you, just kind of point to it and think of the word chair, a picture of a chair, and the actual chair itself. So there's no actual physical artwork that I am producing, but I am evoking the concept of the chair. And this had already been hinted at by surrealists. This had already been hinted at by artists that were dabbling in early abstraction, right? We're messing with you kind of psychologically. We're asking you to question. There's a lot of questioning in 21st century art because, we're all anxiety driven, as you saw in the video last week. So the difference between the word, the verbal language itself, images, and an actual chair. Is it just a chair because we call it a chair? Scientifically, um, what is it made out of? It's asking you to really question yourself. And this is the piece itself, it chair. And that was my last slide. We have a short lecture today, but I have several videos for you, so that'll make up the time. Sorry about that. But I really wanted to introduce these two new art styles and have you kind of really think outside of the box with art. We're really going in directions in which we've hinted at, but we've never explored. And next week, again, I'm going to introduce probably a documentary or something to do with contemporary art.